So without further ado, I'd like to go to our first question, where we really want to get an idea of where digital champions, how they've come about and what impact they've had. So if I could sort of firstly point to you, Lesley. I mean, West Midlands 5G is possibly one of the more well-known initiatives started by a local council to push 5G in particular. And I think some of the successes that you've announced, that you have the best 5G coverage among many big cities across the UK. I think the question is quite simple. I mean, how did you go about how did West Midlands 5G come about? How did it get started? How easy was that?
Right, that's a good question, actually. Going back, I think 3.5 years ago now, the West Midlands was absolutely super keen to be the region to roll out the first urban 5G testbed, and were successful. Now, the importance of that is there were a number of objectives, but linked to the conversation today, one of our key objectives was to accelerate the rollout of 5G. Now, to do that, I think there's some things that John said in the introductory bit about education and awareness. So, you know, it's fine to say we'll accelerate the rollout of 5G, but why? What are the benefits, and what is the commitment required? And facing the local authorities, there clearly was an energy behind the bid in terms of them wanting to be part of the urban testbed and the benefits it delivers. So that awareness, that education piece delivers the thinking behind the benefits to see what it's going to deliver for citizens and for residents in their area. So that is super important. The second element is commitment. So you talked about the stats in terms of strategy, and I can't remember, but I know it's less than 50%. So it's actually, there's no point in having roles like digital champions if there isn't that commitment and strategy behind it. And I think it's also important to point out, we worked with the combined authority, but we worked with 7 local authorities. So it's quite a complex kind of political background, but working with them, I think one of the first things on day one that we did was set up a digital forum and establish the roles of champions and coordinators. And Heather, I'm really pleased to say, from Wolverhampton is here, and we've worked extremely closely with Heather and the team. So it's really kind of important to get that engagement, that facilitation, and the big word for me is collaboration. I can give you some stats now, Gareth, on some of our achievements. We wouldn't have had the achievements if we hadn't have worked in a collaborative manner with the organisations, local authorities that I've mentioned. You've already pointed out that West Midlands is the best connected region according to an independent study, and we're proud of that. But we've done other things. I'm sure Heather will say, for example, the rollout of 5G, we've accelerated from probably between 6 to 12 months against plan, which is quite a big leap. But I think importantly also are the social and economic benefits. And again, we've had independent reports suggesting for our region over 100 million pounds worth of social economic benefits. So a real buy-in for, you know, local authorities in terms of their commitment to residents. So I'll stop there, Gareth. I hope that answered your question.
No, that's absolutely fantastic. I think that point of collaboration is extremely important, and the forum, bringing the industry and the local authorities, local government together, and actually having that opportunity to have that conversation is actually a huge step. And one of the reasons why we so value digital champions is that single point of contact, so we know how to and who to speak to within local authorities. Now, you teed up Heather in that, so I think a good opportunity to bring Heather in here. I mean, Heather, you have a digital cabinet member as well, and Councillor, Tom, I know you as well. But just coming to you, Heather, that's really interesting, because often one of the sort of can fall in terms of getting this role moving forward is it doesn't have that political backing. I just wondered, how important is it to have both an officer level in the role of yourself, but also having that backing as in political and preferably at cabinet level?
It is very important. You do need a sort of commitment at a very senior level of the council, plus with the councillors. So our starting point really is we identified a digital champion who was our director of strategy, who reported at the time directly to the chief exec, and a digital coordinator, which was myself. And my job has since been adapted, so it really reflects the importance of digital. And we started off with a councillor champion for digital innovation, but because of the importance of digital to the council and the wider city economy, we've seen that since moved to actually a dedicated cabinet member for digital cities. This was really important to us because actually it's been quite a challenging Our starting point was we had good coverage of superfast and ultra-fast broadband, but we had less full fibre than majority of rural areas. So we started with 0.01%. And there was key issues such as gaps of coverage in our city centres. We were lucky enough to bid for Wave 2 local full fibre network, and on the back of that we committed to barrier busting. So we've worked really closely with WM5G infrastructure acceleration team, whose support has been essential really to help us understand, because none of us are from a telecoms background. We've all come from a different background, but they provided us with that expertise, that knowledge of telecoms, and really held our hands in the actions that we've done around introducing new systems and processes, compensation consideration, leases. All of that has been put in place. And now we're in a system that we went up from 2% gigabyte coverage in September 2020 to 89% now. And that is a huge leap. Full fibre is rolling out across the city, and both incumbent providers are now rolling out full fibre. And as you said, the coverage of 5G across the city is also really good. So I think that's really positive. And having that leadership from all that high level leadership, including around councillors, and that support from W5G has been really critical.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we've got Tom here, who's councillor for Essex, and I think really interesting to hear then from the political side. I mean, there's two questions I've sort of got to you, so apologies for that. But one is, how important do you see this from the political side as opposed to the officer side? And then secondly, if we could come on to, I'd like to answer that first, and I'll come on to the second question.
Thank you very much, and agree with everything that's been said. I think it's absolutely imperative from the political sense, Gareth. I have to say, this next stage of the Essex County Council's digital journey, we were fortunate in one respect. We were pushing against a slightly open door in terms of political objectives. For the last 10 years, Essex County Council had been committing to the superfast broadband rollout, so there was that case to be made, the benefits of high-speed broadband, having that conversation with the public, and appreciation that good quality broadband wasn't just a luxury. It was with every passing month, it was becoming a necessity to the community. But where we have been very successful, and where my boss, my cabinet member, Councillor Lesley Wagland, who she won't mind me saying this, is a force of considerable nature within Essex politics. We have been able to link it to the levelling up agenda. We were very fortunate in Essex, or we're quite proud we're on the front foot to be able to launch our response to levelling up before the government did. And we identified across a large county that has areas of deprivation, but also areas of great affluence, urban and largely rural, areas where improved connectivity, improved digital connection can actually make a real difference to people's lives. So linking it up with levelling up, and particularly areas of hidden deprivation. As I said, we've got, and particularly in my home district of Braintree, which, and for those who are not familiar with the county of Essex, is the large rural part located between Stansted Airport and Colchester. It's many sort of chocolate box type villages, you know, on the face of it, affluence embodied, but actually some real areas of hidden deprivation in some of these issues, in some of these areas. And focusing it to the levelling up agenda means we can actually really focus on positive outcomes for communities in our county that otherwise would have been forgotten.
I think your point there about deprivation is really interesting, because what we find is that actually areas of deprivation, or families and residents who are further down that scale, actually are more reliant on mobile. And in many cases, actually, mobile is their only access to the internet. And if you think about, that's also access to jobs, it's access to their doctors, it's access to their communities. It shows just quite how important it is. And again, that sort of infrastructure in those areas, it's getting that foundation right before you can offer those opportunities. The second part of my question does sort of come on to that, because during the pandemic, at the very high start of the pandemic, there was a lot of concern about 5G, and some conspiracy theorists linked it to COVID. Now, I can certainly say in this panel that that is just not possible. If we could put biological matter over our airways, we'd also have a pretty decent industry in travel and beaming you back and forth to Australia. That's not possible. But you took a very proactive initiative in Essex with your B5G Smart campaign, and essentially went out to build the area as somewhere that wanted 5G, and built an awareness campaign with residents on that. I just really, your experience, and was there any pushback from the community? Because we've heard, and I'll come on to John after this, about that perception and awareness point. That, you know, still there's a lack of understanding in many cases about what the infrastructure is, what it does, and is it safe, and things like that, which I'm keen to sort of see, you know, very proactive on your part. So please do enlighten us.
Yes, and we're very pleased with how this campaign landed with our residents. The sense that I got was, obviously the timing was right. Residents' appreciation and need for improved technology really went through the roof in the last 2 years. People discovering their own digital talents that they perhaps didn't realise they had, and it was essential that they develop those talents. So people were, I think residents were keen and in the mood to hear about new technology and the benefits. So I think it helps that our residents were approaching this with a little more of an open mind than perhaps they would have done 2 or 3 years ago, when, dare I say, the conspiracy theorists and those who are very anti were making the case. I think we found it, again, a very useful opportunity to engage with our residents on an issue of great importance. And sometimes, particularly in local government, and particularly with the commitments that the whole of the local government sector has been obligated to deliver over the last two and a half years, the opportunities to do that aren't great. They don't happen often enough. So that, combined with a message and the ability to educate our residents and inform them very openly, sort of warts and all type discussions, and very proactive and interactive, I think led to a very, very successful campaign where many people were engaged.
Brilliant, thank you. I think I should just add on the point of the issues, the concerns and questions you may get about health and other issues such as cancer and radiation. Please do check Mobile UK's 5G Check the Facts campaign. We have a lot of information on there, which please feel free to use with residents and internally within your councils. That outlines really some of those key questions that you've got. Equally, just one other before I go to you, John. I know I said I'd bring you in, but if you do have questions that you consider during as we go through, please do pop them in the Q&A, the question area, and if we have time, we'll bring up some of those at the end. Now, John, as we've heard, you know, from all the other three panelists, that awareness piece is really important and has been touched on, I think, in your research. So I just wondered if you might expand upon that.
Yeah, the awareness is critical to understand why we have it and what the infrastructure really is and what it will provide. So, you know, first of all, we all sit there with our mobile phones, we watch Netflix, we use computers, we watch TV that now is streamed rather than more than through the airwaves that it used to be. You know, so we do this naturally, but I don't think people understand how that is serviced and how it is delivered. And then we look at the future and we talk about how we then look at, you know, smart buildings, smart applications, getting more efficient properties, be it in residential as well as commercial. And with the current, you know, threats of inflation and the rising costs of energy, you know, running a smart home, i.e. minimizing electricity bills, is going to be essential for all members of the public. So understanding how connectivity, understanding how the infrastructure enables you to achieve some of those objectives is really critical. And it's like the old analogy, isn't it? When you go and catch a train, you go and catch a train, you sit on the carriage, you don't think about the track that takes you from A to B. It's the same with connectivity. It's the track that is there carrying all the information, carrying all the information and data from one point to the other. But all you do is you think about your device that you're communicating through, not the track it goes through. And it's trying to create that awareness that you can't have one without the other. And then when you talk about mobile infrastructure in particular, siting and location sometimes can be at conflict with local residents and communities. However, the connection has to be serviced in the area that the customers and the public are. You can't put them out of periphery, simply otherwise the coverage won't achieve its objective and therefore meet the objectives of those people using their devices. So there is this whole awareness of what you hold in your hand or what you're typing on needs infrastructure and what that infrastructure looks like and how it's deployed.
Brilliant. And I certainly, from the industry's perspective, that sort of point about what the infrastructure is, how it operates, is something that we are looking at and how to better explain that. And certainly, I know there's one of the common ones we get is why can't a mast or a pole look like a tree? And I think obviously my sort of to that is there are options that you can use these, but bespoke adds a lot of expense. But also, a tree took 1 million years to evolve as a tree. We do build the infrastructure so it propagates the best signal. And equally, where we build mobile masts, it is done by radio planning, and therefore there's a lot of thought that goes into it. So actually, that brings us into planning, and that is one of those areas which is often considered one of the most difficult, and between the industry and authorities. But Lesley, coming to you with West Midlands, I know you've had quite a lot of success in helping to smooth the process in terms of planning, utilising several sort of different functions such as pre-application discussions and getting through to approvals. Very interested if you could just enlighten us on how that is, how successful that has been.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that links to, you're talking about digital champions. And at the beginning, I think it was Heather actually said, not just digital champions, but coordinators, because there's the level of kind of leadership and strategy, but there's also that level of navigating, and navigating a local authority it's a complex landscape in terms of both legal and planning, etc. So you're not just going in and pointing to one department to look at a problem or facilitate a good outcome. You're dealing with lots of different departments, and it is quite complex. So some of the things that we've done is, yes, absolutely working closely with our digital coordinators to make sure we're having the right conversations with the right people. Back to John's point about education, it's not just about education in terms of the benefits that I mentioned, but it's also helping break down that complex landscape. So we've done a lot of work in terms of awareness of the legal framework, what can be done, what can't be done, the planning framework, etc. So that in other words, simplify it so there's a level of understanding about what can and can't be done. And then I think the third element is all of that is the whole process, is how can the process be standardized so it can be quicker and easier and simpler to get decisions made. And so all those three elements are kind of consist of our barrier busting approach that we've used in the West Midlands. And I know Heather will probably, I keep pointing to Heather, I'm doing your job for you, Gareth, but I know Heather's at the end, is a recipient at the end of what we've done, so can probably delve a bit deeper and be a bit of an advocate of some of the things that we've done that enable benefits for you, Heather.
Over to me. Yeah, I'd have to agree with all of that. I think our starting point, as I said, none of us were telecoms expertise, so it was really useful to have the support from WM5G to really help us understand basic things like the code, like how things work. Very much that importance of introducing those standardized processes and agreements. So we've got standard leases for rooftops and greenfield leases. We've got standardized methods of working out compensation and consideration. And very much part of that was actually that educating other departments within the council and that culture change. So traditionally, rooftop masts had been seen as an income generation, and we wanted to change that. So it was seen as actually we understand the benefit of a 5G, so we're going to facilitate that. Our planners have really adopted that proactive approach to working with telecoms companies. So rather than going through that cycle of rejection, they engage in pre-application discussions. So they will proactively work with the mobile network operators that if a proposed site is unlikely to pass planning permission, they will work with them and look at other alternative sites. And that idea, what you said about one of the things they look at, well, can it be located with trees so it doesn't stand out so much? Can it be in a different colour? So there's been real proactive approach in that, and I think that's really paid off. But it does need that. There is a lot of coordination involved. There's a lot of working with other departments and helping them understand this new way of working and educating them. I'm trying to make our lives as easy as possible by having those standardized processes and agreements. But you don't have to reinvent the wheel because a lot of that is already available. And most of the standardized documents we've used, we've got from other local authorities, which were leading the way. So it's, but again, having that sort of technical support has really helped.
Yeah, and if I could add, Heather, I think there's a level of kind of independent facilitation and experts. So in other words, we can bring someone in without an agenda. We've got the expertise, so we can work, both authority side and operator side with a kind of neutral role facilitating, and I think that's important.
I think that neutral role is really, really interesting. I mean, this brings us on to possibly the second question of this panel, which is sort of, well, if the digital champions are clearly so effective, why are they not so commonplace? And I'd be keen here to sort of explore sort of what are the barriers to setting them up. And before we get the local authority perspective, I'd like to go to John, and then Tom, I think I'll come to you after that. But John, in the research, what were the barriers? Did you come across any barriers as to why digital champions themselves are not necessarily as commonplace, and why councils might be averse to them?
I think the research illustrated it was just the aspect of it being in its infancy. The market has matured at pace. We've gone from 2G, 3G, rapid to 4, 5G. We've gone, from the copper lines and BT and standard wayleave to having all these new entrants and driving this whole new infrastructure and digging up the road, so to speak, from that perspective. So I think we've got to go from the assumption it's purely based on that infancy perspective, and we need to illustrate the benefits of releasing funds to enable people to go in and attract this. And actually, from the grand scheme of running the UK and budgets at central and at local level, the cost of deploying digital champions is probably marginal for the gains that it attracts, because you need that facilitation, mentioned there, that sort of coordination, that project management, that ownership, to be custodians of that and actually manage it through. And I think the research has shown that those who have started that process have benefited, and therefore the test bed, the examples are there to be seen, and therefore it should be replicated in other areas, and there should be that common growth in this area to support the national rollout of all digital connections that are needed. Brilliant,
thank you. Tom, so I was going to come to you. I mean, as the politician here, I wondered, again, one of the barriers seems to be, how do you get the political side to buy into this? How do you look at it as an investment rather than a cost? And I've just wondered if you can give us an idea of how you think officers can best make the case to politicians. So for those here today, if they see this and they understand it, I mean, I know you had a bit of an open door, but would you have any advice on how officers can come to the politicians and say, look, this is a great idea, how do we go forward with it?
I think, well, first of all, once again, amplifying those great social and economic benefits that we sort of touched on as we go through these difficult times. But I have to say, from a rather cynical point of view, I think it's actually demonstrating potential savings to the operating of the services and the organisation. Now, making the case for an income stream is extremely attractive when the sector is under tremendous financial pressure. So if you can actually link the investment to a double value for the taxpayer, then I think politicians would be extremely receptive to that. One, that actually levers in the social and economic benefits, but actually brings home the revenue to pay for the essential services which have to be delivered regardless.
I think, well, and as we've heard, and actually I'd come back to possibly Lesley on this one. Yeah, that case of it becoming an investment and making those savings. I mean, it seems obvious, but often that is not the view. And I wondered, how do we make, because as you said, I think Heather pointed out as well, it's an economic good. It's not necessarily just a revenue earner. How did West Midlands, because I think West Midlands known as one of the better resourced, but actually, you got there because you made that case.
Yeah, and it's return on investment, isn't it? So it's spot on. Councils have got budgets and they've got priorities. So how do they make a decision to invest time, money? So yeah, we have to be honest. We focused on some key areas. So yeah, we focused on getting the digital champions in place and understanding it. But there are other elements, because I think what the important bit is, you've got to remember the infrastructure is just the foundation. So the big bit is the innovation layer that you put on top of it, and that's then delivering the benefits, delivering business growth, economic growth to the region. So what we then did is focused on some key areas that were really pertinent to us as a region, and it may be different for other areas, but manufacturing was big for the West Midlands, health tech is really important, and transport were big areas. So what we then did was actually do the proof layer. So we then sort of worked with what can we deliver in terms of innovations, and we did it in kind of real world scenarios. So there's lots of R&D activity out there, but to actually make some proof and trials actually in the region. So we're rolling out 5G road sensor network on our key road networks, that we can manage traffic flows, that can actually manage pollution. So you can actually then kind of turn it round back to the economic cases. I'm not very good on my geography in Essex, Tom, but in the West Midlands, we've got the major, we've got the M6 major infrastructure. We've got big problems in terms of traffic management. We need the region to be attractive for businesses. We need the region to be attractive for visitors coming to the region. So we need to ensure good traffic management. But it links to then, actually, what does that mean in terms of pollution? What does that mean? So if we can actually have 5G sensors on our roads, monitoring flows, monitoring the effect and impact on like environmental issues, then when you're actually doing a business case, you're not just looking at, oh, we're installing 5G, you've got other benefits as well. So I've just given one example there, but we looked at that in health examples as well, and transport, manufacturing.
Great. And Heather, just I come back on a point that you made as well, was that, again, that revenue over the economic goods. I mean, very much now, I think connectivity is very much linked with place. You don't necessarily, you couldn't, if you sell your house, it will be looked upon whether it's got good fibre or good mobile connectivity. I think that now is very much for businesses as well. Your sort of modern high street has moved more to an experience centre. You need to be connected. Pop-up shops are sort of more coming and going. You need to be able to set up yourself with wireless payments, etc., etc. But one of the other aspects I just wanted to touch on was the infrastructure that you have as a local authority. You are a landowner in your own rights, and actually some of the properties you have are in prime places for mobile infrastructure. And you said, we're moving away from this, well, let's just see if we can cream as much cash as we can, to actually this is essential and actually builds the area. We can then get more business in, more residents want to live here. We don't lose residents to lose those skills, lose those younger people who don't want to live in areas where there's less connectivity. How have you managed to sort of frame that debate and actually make make the case for utilising that infrastructure for mobile equipment?
One of the things we did very early on is a bit of a mapping exercise of our assets. So sort of physical assets such as rooftops, land assets, but also things like streetlights. And that was then fed into the work that WM5G did across the region. And that was made available to mobile network operators to actually, as a sort of resource. So if they're looking for a space that they could put a mast to meet the need of that current area, that they could identify it, and then they would sort of work with the digital leads in the local authority to make that happen. We've gone beyond that now, so we've obviously done a lot of work around sort of telecoms infrastructure on rooftops. We've also had we've done our first sort of greenfield site for a new telecom site, and now we're looking at the use of our street lighting to facilitate the rollout of small cell through a non-exclusive license agreement. So that sort of approach, that sharing of information about what is available, that's been very effective.
Brilliant. And just to sort of carry on with Heather, I'm sort of looking, because as I say, you've got Lesley in West Midlands, very, very well resourced, very well known. What about councils which don't have, and this is open to the whole panel, but what about councils that lack that resource and aren't going to be able to build as large a team, especially smaller councils? And if we move away from the urban areas, how can we sort of build that case for digital champions when it's a lot of I suppose the hill to climb is a lot higher?
I think even in urban areas, actually, there is still a requirement, there is still a need for a digital champion. And a big issue for urban areas is sometimes that there's insufficient resource to identify somebody to spend enough time on it. We've noticed that actually where there is that proactive approach working with fixed and mobile network operators, they tend to go higher up the list to where those areas are sort of struggling to engage with people at a high enough level. So really that sort of that proactive approach, but I would say there's a lot of resources out there that are already being developed. There's standard rooftop and greenfield leases, there's block way leaves, there's toolkits. So utilise resources through those local authorities that have already developed. I know that we very much are very open to sharing what we've already done with other areas, and that makes their life a lot easier because a lot of the hard work's already been done.
Excellent. Does anyone else want to come in on that point?
No, I'll just reiterate that actually is that although we've supported the region, our remit is actually national now. So we're open to share our learning wider than our current region. So happy to help and share, as Heather mentioned.
There's an opportunity to share best practice beyond this forum. That's fantastic. Tommy, I think you were just going to jump in there.
Yes, just very quickly to agree with everything that Heather says. Resources, it's a slightly different setup in Essex. We're the county council with districts, boroughs and city councils underneath, and with the best will in the world, our partner authorities have neither got the financial ability or, even more pressing, the human resources to devote to such an endeavour. So if we can work collaboratively as the county authority to spearhead this, then that's advantageous to all. And I have to say, particularly over the last 2 years, our district, the relationships we have with our district councils in doing this work with them and for them has moved on leaps and bounds, and we're very fortunate in that respect.
Excellent. And just building on that, and then sort of back to the role itself. Again, as from the political side here, we can see the great work of officer level here. How do you support the digital champions from the political side? What do you see as your role? And once we've got that buy-in, how do you ensure it continues and can be effective?
I think sorry, to me first or to
you are the
oh right, no, that's fine. Yeah, no,
thank you.
I think constant sort of reaffirming of the message and the objectives and the big picture strategy that's underpinning all this, and linking it to the to positive outcomes for residents, so officers know that we're actually coming from this not just from a cynical political position, but actually a real position of social benefit, and really just a constant encouragement and a two-way conversation, understanding what is required to keep communicating the message and help the advocacy. It does help that local politicians do have some access to national politicians, and I think it's very important that we continue to say, look, if you need help, do you need us to help our national politicians make the case louder and clearer as well. So, yeah.
Brilliant. I think we'll come on to that in the final question, but just before we get on to that, I think we just mentioned here, it keeps coming up. The digital champion is someone who has those skills to understand the role. I think when we've looked at digital champions across the country from a Mobile UK perspective, they vary in quality, in what the resource they have, or even both in budget, but also time. We've seen some digital champions are merely someone who helps the elderly learn to use an iPad. Others are those that only have 10% allocated to their time. It's not their full-time role, and they struggle to put that into, or it falls down the agenda, or they don't have that political support. Just wondered, again, pointing out how important is it to have a digital champion with the right skills, for their ability to talk with the industry, build that relationship. I think I'll come to Heather on that one, please.
Well, I'd have to say that I have to admit that when I started this, I had a bit of experience with broadband from previous jobs, but there was a lot of learning involved. But I think the main thing is that understanding of how important digital is and willing to learn new things. And so that is really important. I would still have to say I'm only 50% on digital, but I actually started off the way I got in it is I wrote the local full fibre network bid from that focus on infrastructure. We've now expanded, so my remit now includes infrastructure, inclusion, innovation, and economy. And I'm very pleased to say I now have a team as well, which has just shown the commitment that Wolverhampton has put to digital, that there is now a dedicated team pushing this forward, and we've recognised that it's not the infrastructure is the building block which brings all the really exciting opportunities around innovation in service delivery, and we're doing some really exciting work on that but you're constantly learning, and there's still things I don't understand.
And Lesley, would you like to sort of come on that? What's the importance of the skills of the digital champion themselves?
Yeah, the right skill set is vitally important. Like I think I've kind of said this before, is my two things are kind of like strategic, so it's that leadership, element, but a really, really big one is, I'm sure as mobile network operators, navigating a local authority is very hard. And so it's actually having someone hands-on that can help you navigate, get to the right person. But, key to that is actually having that relationship. So relationships are really important. I keep going on about collaborating, but I can't say it enough because I think that's important. So what the right skill set is really having someone that you can actually work with the local authority, navigating who the right people are. That is, to me, the really important thing. But also going back to it is back to my comment at the beginning about benefits, because actually, and I know we've done this, Heather, but is actually, yeah, you can talk about the infrastructure, but if you can actually then show some benefits, if you've got a use case that's come to life and you can actually then make it real for someone, that's also extremely powerful. So we all know you need the infrastructure in place, but actually the benefit bit is showing actually what does that deliver, what outcome will that actually deliver is the powerful thing. So we've done an element of building up our different use cases and sharing them, because that's again an element of the education piece. It's not just the why, but actually what it delivers.
And John, actually, tease me up to you on this, that benefit piece. I think that came out quite clearly as well in the research that you've done, is understanding the benefit of mobile connectivity. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's essential. It's essential. And at the end of the day, it's important they understand the benefit of digital connectivity, the mobile side, understand the very basis of how it operates. But going back to the question slightly prior, having a digital champion, having someone there, putting a very pragmatic response, having something there is better than nothing at all. And with the current economic pressures that we're all going to be facing over the next 2 to 5 years, there's never going to be enough resource in whatever capacity there is. So it's how you repurpose, reutilize, become efficient to enable some bandwidth. Even for those with no digital champions, if there can be some incremental increase year on year, and for those that are much more well set up, how they continue that journey on the back of the promising investments they've shown. So, let's all be slightly practical about this. It's never going to be easy. It's never going to be here's your checkbook and roll it out. So where are the marginal gains so that everyone can start seeing the incremental benefit? But ultimately, in due course, they should know how mobile coverage works, how it works with the signal strength, the requirement for backhaul to go through the fixed line connectivity. So you need a mobile phone, you need a mobile phone mast, but that mast needs to be connected to full fiber broadband or a decent broadband so it connects back to the grid. All these, the eco cycle of connectivity needs to be understood at some point by digital champions, but it's got to start by being that sort of on the ground project manager is, I suppose, the most important first stage.
Brilliant. And I think this sort of teases up to the final question in this series, which is, again, digital champions are clearly effective, and the work that we see from all panelists here is really having an effect. And I think from our point of view from industry, it is much easier to engage with areas that have a digital champion. It's that single point of contact. But one thing we do recognise, and certainly from an industry perspective, is that local authorities are clearly constrained in their financial ability to bring about digital champions. And one of the things that we are doing is campaigning to the central government. But on that question, what I was keen to do is, and John, I think I'll come to you on this one. Your research has again made the case, but what do you believe needs to be done, and what is the role for central government in this aspect?
My high level view is obviously their role is to enable us to develop infrastructure nationally. On that basis, they need to support in terms of planning policy alterations. They need to support in the ECC code reform, the code that came in 2017, and the current refinement that's going through the passing of bill at the present time. But then also there's funding, and as I went back earlier, digital champions in the grand scheme of what is £1 billion rollout of infrastructure, the provision of funding to support the employment and provision of digital champions could be a relatively small sum and affordable for much greater good and greater benefit. So I do have a very strong belief on the back of the research that if there's one element of funding that should come out of central government, it would be for the provision of this, which creates the knowledge, it creates the ability to have that digital champions, and then it also gives the benefit of putting more aspects for employment in local authorities and areas. So I think that there's benefit all round from that perspective.
Excellent, and I think that policy point, I think we'd certainly agree from our side. And Heather, just coming back to you here, sort of, what is the role for local government? And Tom, I'll come on to you in a second, but we've got the LGA supporting this today, which I think is fantastic, and that really sort of puts across the importance of digital connectivity, and we'd certainly like to thank them for it. But there are other bodies like the National Association of Local Councils, the County Councils Network, and the District Councils Network. Do they see mobile and digital connectivity as important? Because often when we see their sort of annual conferences, and we've presented to them, it's often a bit of a struggle to get this onto the agenda. And I wonder if there is a role to ensure we can get not just the LGA supporting digital champions, but those other national bodies as well. That was Heather, sorry.
Definitely. I mean, I do sit on the ADAPT group, and I always forget what it stands for, and they've specifically got a digital connectivity theme, and it is around really within those other organisations raising the awareness of the importance of this, both as an infrastructure in itself and what it can deliver, those benefits to delivery of other services. And I think once that understanding is out there, that really helps. But I think in the digital world, there's lots of really good resources out there to really help people understand. I know the Digital Leaders initiative is really useful for finding out some really good practice from elsewhere and helping to adopt it locally. But there are some, I think this is probably one of the best areas in terms of those networks around sort of digital, which really help local authorities set up their own schemes and own approach in this area.
Excellent. And then Tom, I said I want to come to you on that, because especially from the county level, I think one of the things I've experienced is at county level, the strategic power for this doesn't sit with the county, yet in my view, potentially that's actually one area where it has that pan authority ability. It has that ability to share best practice with the districts. Is there a role potentially that we should see more from county councils to push this agenda?
I think there absolutely is. Unfortunately, what we sometimes have, and this is a criticism of the system. It isn't a criticism of particular politics or politicians or particular political colours. There is that disconnect between the noble objectives of government and the actual ability to deliver through local government, and particularly on matters relating to planning. And as we've sort of spoken of, as we've sort of mentioned this morning, the role of planning in this endeavour is absolutely huge, in formulating those planning policies at local plan stages to ensure the rollout of these initiatives are very much part of the key considerations. So I think there's a role for government to play in helping smooth some of those cracks over. We could say, yeah, absolutely more resources, but there's only finite resources. But actually, I think the government actually just really needs to give greater awareness, as I think Helen said, particularly to the work of digital champions. I can only speak for my county council, Essex County Council. We're extremely fortunate, and we have digital champions supported by a team of officers, a small team of officers. They're excellent, but there's fewer numbers, but who are actually willing to go out and do the work, do the advocacy on behalf of the county of this, and really, again, join perhaps the gap between the private sector and the public sector. And I think the government can play a role in helping us build that gap and smooth some of those cracks open. And it doesn't necessarily mean further capital outlay. It just needs advocacy, support, advice, and a little bit more leadership in certain places, really.
Brilliant.
Just on that note, Gareth, I mean, I don't know how this will play out, so I agree with what Tom is saying, but, you know, DCMS just launched, was it just a few weeks ago, the UK digital strategy, of which, what was it? I think it was pillar 4, or certainly one of their pillars was robust digital infrastructure. And Tom, you've already referred to the Levelling Up white paper that, again, has a mission in the same respect. So what one could think they've got the right intent. It's then how that plays out at the local level, isn't it?
Yeah, and if I may just, Gareth, following on from that, we're quite fortunate in Essex because we've sort of made the switch with our own digital board from being a local government focused, actually just talking about the rollout of what was a broadband project, to actually having the police, the NHS, representative businesses there. So building that public-private partnership, which is going to be essential for whoever is the government in the next 5-10 years, when the overriding focus is on economic and social recovery.
I wanted to finish off on really sort of why the digital champion is so important, and actually what we are campaigning for as Mobile UK. We see a digital champion as something that has to have 5 minimum attributes. One of those is it needs to be fully funded. I've spoken about how some have only 10% of the role. This needs to be a role that is fully funded and can do its role without interference. That, again, is something we're looking to central government. We're looking through the local levelling up agenda, special access funds and other areas. And Heather's mentioned a few others as we've gone forward. We believe it needs to be a senior level role. It needs to have that cross-cutting ability to work across departments, work with the estates department, work with the planning department, work across so it can help and bring those departments together. We've heard from Tom as well. You know, it has to have that political backing as well, that political responsibility for the role to ensure it can continue and it isn't a sort of fly in the plan. But equally, on the political side, there needs to be leadership. We need to go out there and explain to our residents what the benefits of mobile connectivity are, so that when an application does come in for a mast, they understand why it is there and why it is needed. Now, obviously, as we've also heard, that collaboration point about how we can work to ensure it is in the best place possible. Fourthly, a role needs experience and skills. It needs to be able to speak with the industry on the same par, take out that jargon or understand that jargon. And I think that is really important to sort of break down that them and us. Finally, that outcome, not output focused. It can't just be for a single thing. This needs to look at digital connectivity on the whole. We are talking from Mobile UK as mobile, but actually a digital champion needs to look at the whole digital gambit. That's low power networks, small cells, mobile public networks, equally full fibre and digital. When we look at other technologies as we go forward, private networks or even satellite communications. This digital gambit is going to be so important, and therefore it needs to be something that looks on all of those. And then finally, what can be achieved? We've had some really fascinating insights into what a digital champion can achieve. Some of those are things like standardized documentation to make it more consistent across areas, including things like standardized wayleaves, the sharing of best practice, again, what we've got here today, but allowing sort of, especially on a pan authority basis, as we've heard from Essex's ability to talk to its district councils. That dispute resolution, there seems to be, especially what's coming through in the question and answers is some more concern about dispute. Yet what we've seen for digital champions, they've had a real opportunity to level that out. Finally, asset collation and sharing. What are the public assets? How can they be made available? How can we ensure that they are part of the gambit of building out that mobile infrastructure? Finally, awareness campaigns, things like that B5G Smart campaign, West Midlands, again in Wolverhampton, building that understanding about what 5G is, what mobile connectivity is, why it is important. And then, as I say, that collaboration in industry building. Ultimately, what can we achieve with this? We can achieve better coverage and better connectivity, and ultimately, as we go forward, better connectivity. So I'd like to thank everyone for the panel today. We've had the LGA, we've had Heather, we've had John, we've had Tom, and we've had Lesley. It's been a really great show. I certainly have learned a lot from it. I hope those that are on the call have too. And on that note, thank you. We will be sharing this. It has been recorded, so if you, we will be sending that out to you. And ultimately, for those who couldn't attend, that will be available too. Please do share any insights on social media. We're working with the hashtag Building Mobile Britain. And again, I'd like you to refer to the Mobile UK website for things like hashtag 5G check the facts, sorry. And equally, we will be putting more information. And I would say we build on feedback. If there are questions and answers that have been answered that would be helpful as a resource on our website, please do feed them in, and we can certainly put that. So from my point of view, and I'm sure from our panelists and from the LGA as well, thank you very much.